In this video, I'm going to be repairing this mid-2010 13-inch Apple MacBook Pro logic board. Now this board has a couple issues. The main issue is this right here. So as you can see, the keyboard connector looks very, very bad, and so does the little backlit, or the keyboard backlight connector right next to it. So I'm going to be replacing both of these, hopefully successfully. Hopefully I can desolder one from another board without melting it. I think I should be able to do that with my board preheater. And then the next thing we're going to be doing is fixing this LVDS connector. So as you can see here, like part of it is just missing, like the whole metal shroud. And as you can see, some of the pins look pretty bad there. So while this connector actually does work, and you can see I have my testing screen plugged into it right now, the backlight does not work. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the board on here, and I'll show you what I mean. Alright, so as you can see, the board is now on. And you might have been able to see that there, but the screen did come on. And if I shine a light at it, in a minute here, you should see the flashing question mark. And you have to shine it through the Apple logo. And I'm going to try to shine it through the Apple logo here. And yeah, you can see the flashing question mark is showing right there. So what we're going to do in this video is, of course, I'm going to replace both of those, or all three of those connectors actually. The LVDS connector, the keyboard connector, and the keyboard backlight connector. We'll test the board, see if the backlight works after just replacing the connector, and if not, we will go through the process of trying to figure out what exactly is wrong with this backlight circuit here, and get the backlight to work. So I'm going to go ahead and put the camera in a tripod here, and we'll go ahead and start by removing the keyboard connector and the keyboard backlight connector. So I'll go ahead and put it in the tripod and resume the video. Alright, so as you can see, we have now gotten the board into position and we are ready to begin soldering. So of course the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do here is apply some flux to these connectors. So I'll go ahead and get my flux here. Just apply it along the pins, just like so. And that should be good. So the next thing, of course, we're going to do is we're going to turn on the board preheater. And this is just going to heat the bottom of the board just so I don't have to, heat the top as much and risk melting the connectors. Go ahead and turn that on. And it is now heating the board. And as you can see, the flux is already starting to flow. So now I'll go ahead and turn on my hot air station. And I'll let that warm up, and then we'll begin removing the connector. Alright, and as you can see, the keyboard connector is off now, so let's just get this one off. Just like that. And there we go. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is just clean up those pads a little bit with the soldering iron. And then once we do that, we'll get a new connector off of a different board, and then begin the process of soldering it onto this one. So I'm going to go ahead and clean these pads up, and then we'll proceed with the rest of the process. Alright, so you can see we have the board ready right here. So now what I'm just going to go ahead and do is go ahead and take my soldering iron here, and then just go over the pads with some leaded solder, and that should clean them right up. Alright, so that looks pretty good. So now what we're going to do is just take some solder wick here and remove all of the residual solder. Go ahead and get some out here. Alrighty, so all the pads look nice and clean now. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is remove all the residual flux. So I'll just take some rubbing alcohol and Q-tips here like usual and clean them off. And it looks like 2 pads might be missing off the little keyboard connector, or the keyboard backlight connector there, so I might try to put a little bit more flux on there and see if I can't rejuvenate those, but it doesn't look like they're coming back. Yeah, it doesn't really look like those pads are going to come back, so, oh well, just have to live without those. But it shouldn't be too hard to figure out where they go to using the schematic and then run some sort of jumper wire. Yeah, I ripped away a little bit of the solder mask there, but don't think that should be much of a problem. It looks like there's 1 pad on the keyboard connector that could use a little bit of work too, so let me try that. Oh, that one came right back to life. Yeah, we should be good now. Alright, good. We should be all set now. So now what I'll go ahead and do is get out another board to remove the keyboard connector from, and then we'll use that to solder onto this board. So let me get that board out, and then I'll go ahead and resume the video. Alright, so you can see I've now got a new board on the board preheater ready to begin the process of removing the connectors. So we'll proceed with the exact same process we did before. That is, we'll apply some flux to the connector like so. A little bit to that one. And then we'll just go ahead and turn the board preheater on and wait till it heats up. And it is heating up now. So I'll just give it a little while because I don't want to heat this from the top very much because, of course, you risk ruining the connector doing that. So I'm just going to turn my hot air gun on a really low heat and turn it on here and let it warm up. And then once this heats up pretty well, I go ahead and touch it with that and it should pop right off. So just go ahead and wait here. Alright, and that looks like it's heated pretty well, so I'll go ahead and heat it a little bit with the hot air here. That goes out of the way of the camera. Of course, you don't want to heat it very long because you don't want to melt this little plastic piece up top here. Alright, so I've just finished removing the connectors from the donor board. So you can see right here we've got the keyboard connector, and it came off pretty well without melting. And same goes for the little backlight connector, which looks just like that, and that looks perfect as well. So now what we're going to do is go ahead and solder on these new connectors to this board here. So of course the first thing we're going to do is just apply just a little bit of flux. You don't really need very much when you're soldering it on. And that should be just fine. So go ahead and get it flowing here. Alright, and that looks good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just place down the connector and then just solder all of the pins in place. Let's go ahead and grab it here and we'll make sure it's aligned properly. And that looks pretty darn good right there. So just push it down and make sure it's completely flush with the board without moving it like I just did. And then we'll just go ahead and solder one of the pins down. So I'll put a little bit of solder on the end of my iron here. Just a little bit too much. Just a tiny bit. And just hold down the connector. And solder that pin in place. And that feels like it's in place. So then we'll do the same thing for the first pin on the other side of the connector. Just like so. And now that we've gotten that in place, we can just kind of take the soldering iron and drag it across the pins. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. A little bit of extra solder, that's a little bit too much. Just a tad bit. And that is not looking too good. Go ahead and turn my iron up a little bit more. Alright, so not really work as I had hoped. So let me go ahead and just take the wick and get all that excess solder off that I put on there by mistake. And then we should be good to solder it on once again. Get my solder wick out here. There we go. Let's get that solder off there. Alright, and then we'll just go ahead and try again, doing the same thing. And you can see that I'm kind of unbridging it here, just with my soldering iron. And it is actually working pretty well. And the thing is, you just have to keep adding flux. The more flux you have on it, the easier it is. And there we go. That looks good. I got all the bridges out and it looks perfectly fine. So now the next thing, of course, I'm going to do is I'm going to solder this in, the backlight connector. Now this is going to be a little bit more difficult just because of how it is. So yeah, it kind of sits up here like this, and then you solder in the bottom part of it. So I'm just going to start by placing it down and soldering that little piece of it in right there. And that looks pretty good already, actually. So now I'm going to add some solder to the little legs of it right here. Actually, I need some flux on that first. There we go. Alright, and that looks pretty good. So let me feel it, make sure it's nice and tight in there. And it is. And yeah, that looks pretty darn good. So let me just add a little bit more solder on that. Good. And that looks just fine. So now that that's done, I'm just going to go ahead and clean all the flux off this, and then it should be good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera, and go ahead and resume the video, and when we get back we should be ready to move on to replacing this LVDS connector. So I'll go ahead and pause the video here and resume it once I get this all cleaned up. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and remove this LVDS connector right here. So, like usual, we'll just put some flux on it, and then we'll turn on the hot air station, or the board preheater, and remove it. Alright, so there we go. Go ahead and turn this on. Now this one I'm not too concerned about melting because I have a bunch of new connectors for it anyway, and this is of course the old bad connector, so it doesn't really matter what happens to it. So we'll go ahead and turn on the hot air station and begin removing it. Alright, and there you go. As you can see, the LVDS connector came right off there. So now we can go ahead and turn that off. And then now what we're going to go ahead and do is solder on a brand new LVDS connector. So I'm going to go ahead and get one out, and we'll begin the process of soldering it off. Alright, so I've gone ahead and gotten a new LVDS connector out. You can see it right here. And so now what we're going to do is go ahead and clean up the pads from the original connector. So let's go ahead and put some new flux down. And then we'll go ahead and remove the original solder using some solder wick. So I'm going to go ahead and get some out here. And it doesn't look like it's actually getting hot enough to... there we go. Alright, what I might have to do here is just apply some leaded solder. Like so, and then we'll go ahead and wick it off using the solder wick. There we go. Just like that. That looks pretty good, so now we'll just go ahead and get the pins here. Just like that. Actually, I'm gonna... We might have some pads that aren't quite there. Okay. Alright, there we go. That looks pretty good. Oh yeah, those pins came right back to life. Good. So they should work just fine when we solder on a new connector. And there we go. That looks really, really good. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is just, of course, clean off all the old flux. And then once we do that, we can go ahead and start soldering on the new LVDS connector. Alright, and that looks really good. So, what I'm going to go ahead and do now is apply some new flux, and then I will solder this connector onto the board. So let's go ahead and apply the new flux here. Put a little bit right there and here, and of course we'll put some on the pins as well. So yeah, we don't need too much there. So now I'll go ahead and just heat it up, just to get it flowing a little. And then just take the connector and place it on the board. And there we go, that looks perfect. So now we'll go ahead and take the soldering iron here and apply a little bit of solder on each side of the connector. Alright, that's good. And of course we'll do the same thing to the other side. Just like that. A little bit of excess on there. And then, of course, the last thing to do is to solder on all the pins. So go ahead and do that now. And that looks pretty good. So now we just have to get those little bridges out there, and we should be done. Let's go ahead and... There we go. And there we go, we're done. So let me just use my solder wick to get this little bit of solder I accidentally got on top of the connector. There we go. And yeah, that looks perfect. No bridge connections, and we should be set. Now, I know this board isn't actually going to show a backlight because I noticed there is a missing component right here. And I looked this up on the schematic, and it is a capacitor. It's on the backlight enable rail. And so I'll have to replace that before I turn it on. But after I do that, the board should work. Hopefully the backlight will too. And we should be done. So I'm going to go ahead and get the capacitor that I need. I'll show it to you on the schematic also. And then we'll solder that on and test it. So I'll be right back. Alright, so taking a look at the schematic here, this is the capacitor that is not present on the board. Now, I'm not exactly sure how necessary this capacitor is for this circuit, because all it is like this little, it just takes it to ground here. But yeah, regardless, I am going to just replace that capacitor, or take that capacitor off of another logic board and solder it onto this board. We'll test it and see if it works, and if it doesn't work, chances are it is just this U9701 IC here that is bad. So if we go ahead and take a look at the board view here, this is the capacitor that's missing, C9723, which is right there. And if you take a look at the board here, you can see that that capacitor is missing. So I'm going to go ahead and put the camera back in the tripod, clean up those pads a little bit, and solder a new capacitor on. Now if you take a look at the chip, it doesn't really look that good, which is why I think it might be bad. But yeah, I'll just put that capacitor on. If it doesn't work, I'll test a few voltages, but I'm pretty sure that that chip right there is actually bad. So I'll solder that capacitor on, test it, and we'll proceed with the video, so I'll be right back. Alright, so it turns out that that capacitor actually isn't even supposed to be there. I checked on another board, and it's not on that board either. So I'm just going to go ahead and just take it off and put on a new chip, which I already took off of the other board. So let me go ahead and apply some new flux around this chip. And then we'll go ahead and remove it. Alright, so as you can see, the chip is off, so we'll go ahead and set it aside and place on the new chip. And line it up. Alright, so the new chip is now soldered on, and it looks good there. So now I'll just go ahead and hook the screen back up again, and we'll give it another test, so I'll be right back. Alright, so unfortunately, replacing the backlight IC did not actually solve the issue. However, after doing a bit more testing, I found that there is no power whatsoever on this this rail right here. So that basically goes, it gets this PP bus SW LCD BK LT power, goes through this resistor, and it is used as the enable rail for this chip. Now, of course, when this rail is not getting any power, which it's not in this case, this chip will not do anything. So I'm more than positive that's the issue. So tracing that circuit back a little bit, we find this section of the circuit right here. So this is PP bus S0 LCD backlight, which goes through a fuse. I did test this fuse and it is good. I also tested this voltage divider, which is good. This rail right here is producing about 3.7 volts, which is exactly what it's supposed to be. And then that goes into this Q9806 right here, which supplies this rail when the backlight should be on, and does not supply this rail when the backlight should not be on. And it, opens and closes that path using this rail right here. So basically, when this IC is shorting to ground, that enables this voltage divider, which will turn this on, which supplies this power. Now, while the screen is connected and the machine is powered on, this rail is present right here. However, it is not present right here. So what that means is that there is a broken trace somewhere on the board. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a wire from pins, just 1, 2, 5, or 6. All of those are on the same rail. I'll run a wire from one of those pins to this resistor right here, R9731, and in theory that should supply power to it and get the backlight to turn on. So I'm going to go ahead and put the camera back in the tripod and show you the process of soldering the wire in place. So I'll be right back. Alright, well, it turned out it wasn't actually a bad trace, but rather just a bad solder joint on the little resistor that was right there, the one that's on the backlight enable rail. So I'm just going to go ahead and resolder that resistor on. So I have it right here. It's very tiny, so gotta pick it up here. I'll turn on my hot air. And let that warm up, and then we will prepare to solder it on. Trying to go ahead and place it down here. There we go. And then we'll go ahead and heat it up. Alright, and that one looks like it soldered on just like it was supposed to. So what I'll go ahead and do now is hook the board back up to the screen, and we will test it again and see if we now have a backlight. So I'll be right back. Alright, so as you can see here, I've got the board all plugged in. We have the MagSafe connected, and it is connected to my testing LCD. So let's go ahead and power it on. And look at that, the backlight is working. Now, for some reason there's no image on the screen anymore, but I think that's just because my LVDS connector on my testing screen is really bad. I've kind of been working, unplugging it and plugging it back in a lot, and at first it was flickering with no backlight. When the screen had no backlight, the image was flickering, and now, as you can see, it's just a black screen. However, I think it should work just fine. I'll connect this to another LCD that I know is good, and we'll give it a proper test, as well as the keyboard connector and keyboard backlight connector. So I'll go ahead and hook this board up to its chassis, and we'll go ahead and test it and see if it works fully. So I'll be right back. Alright, so as you can see, I have the logic board installed into a chassis now. And I've got a hard drive connected via USB because there is no hard drive cable in this chassis. So I'll go ahead and turn it on, and we will see if it works. Hold down Option here. Heard the machine turn on, so the power button at least works on the keyboard. And look at that, the backlight is working and the screen is working. So it was my bad LVDS connector, the bad LVDS cable on the other LCD. So we'll go ahead and boot up off the OS here, and the inner key works, so that's good. So yeah, once this goes ahead and finishes booting up, I will resume the video and we'll take a look at the system. Alright, well as you can see, I've gotten the machine to boot, and coincidentally the keyboard that I was using in the top case originally when I first started the machine up, that keyboard actually ended up being bad, and it was causing the machine to just randomly shut off while it was booting. So I thought my keyboard connector was not soldered on properly, so I looked at that a little bit. I couldn't find anything wrong with it, so I just transferred everything over to a new top case, and now it works perfectly fine. So let me go ahead into About This Mac, and the reason the backlight's not on is because the connector, or the little cable that connects to the logic board, was completely destroyed, because I guess this machine had some water damage as well, and it just ruined that cable, so it doesn't work anymore. But as you can see, the machine is on. The keyboard does work. I can show you that. Command Tab works. I'll open up text edit here, and I can show you that. Yeah, it looks like all the keys work just as you'd expect. Brightness up, that works. That dashboard, yeah, all the keys seem to work. So yeah, I think my keyboard connector works just fine now that I soldered it on. And so here are the specs of the machine. This is a mid-2010 13-inch model, obviously. As you can see, it's got a 2.4 gigahertz Intel Core 2 Duo. Currently have 3 gigs of RAM installed. It's got the GeForce 320M graphics, and yeah, it works perfectly fine. So that has been the repair of this mid-2010 13-inch MacBook Pro logic board. Hope you enjoyed this video.